The sky above Altaria Prime burned red. Zethra pressed her scaled hand against the crystal window of the underground command center and watched her world die. Above the protective dome that covered their last city, alien ships moved like hungry insects. They fired bright beams that turned buildings to ash and people to nothing. The Vortex swarm had come to her planet 3 days ago. First they destroyed the orbital stations. Then they killed the defense fleet. Now they were taking apart everything that made Altaria beautiful. The tall crystal towers that had stood for 1,000 years fell like broken glass. The floating gardens where children played became burning ruins. Zethra turned away from the window. Around her, the last members of the Altarian High Council worked at their stations. Their blue skin had turned pale with fear. Their large eyes reflected the red glow of the dying city above them. "How many ships do they have now?" she asked Commander Veltar. The old soldier looked up from his scanner. His voice shook when he spoke. 40 million, Ambassador. Maybe more. They keep making new ones from our destroyed ships. 40 million. The number made Zethra's hearts beat faster. Her people had maybe 3,000 ships left, and most of those were civilian transports hiding in deep space. The Altarians were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and their art, not for fighting wars. They had no weapons that could stop the swarm. "What about the other species?" asked Council Leader Morseth. "The Centaurian Republic? The Silicon Confederacy?" Veltar's face grew darker. "Gone, all of them. The Centaurians lasted 2 weeks. The Silicon Confederacy tried to hide in their metal worlds, but the swarm found them. The ethereal collective just vanished when they saw the swarm coming. The room fell silent. For 300 years, those great civilizations had protected the galaxy. Now they were all destroyed or running away. The Vortex swarm ate everything in its path. It turned planets into ships and people into soldiers. Nothing could stop it." Zethra walked to the communication station. The young technician there had tears in her eyes. "Send a message to all remaining governments," Zethra said. "Full spectrum broadcast. Emergency frequency. What should I say?" The technician asked. "That we need help. That anyone who can hear us should come and take our children, our knowledge, our art. Something of us must survive." The technician's fingers moved over the controls. "I'm getting responses, Ambassador. The Rigel Union says they can take 5,000 refugees. The free traders offer transport for our genetic libraries. She stopped. Her face went white. "What is it?" "Someone is answering from the Sol system." From Earth, Zethra felt surprise. Humans. The young species that had joined the galactic community only 37 years ago. Everyone knew about them, of course. They came from a dangerous world where everything tried to kill everything else. Most species thought they were too violent to be civilized. They had built some fast ships and had good computers, but nothing special. "What do they say?" The technician listened to her earpiece. They say they're coming. All of them. The whole human fleet. How many ships?" "They don't say." "But Ambassador..." The technician's voice grew quiet. "They're not talking about evacuation. They're talking about fighting the swarm." Commander Veltar laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Fighting? With what? Humans have maybe 5,000 ships. The swarm will crush them in minutes." Zethra stared at the communication board. Why would the humans come here to die? It made no sense. Every smart species was running away from the swarm. Only fools would try to fight it, but something in the human message felt different. The voice had been calm, almost cold. Not the voice of someone about to die. The voice of someone who had made a decision. "How long before they arrive?" she asked. 6 hours, Ambassador. They're coming fast. Faster than should be possible." The ground shook above them as another part of the city died. Through the crystal window, Zethra could see the swarm ships moving in their endless patterns. Soon they would find this shelter too. Soon her people would join all the others who had been consumed, unless the humans could buy them time to escape. Zethra closed her eyes. In her mind, she could see human children learning about the day their species chose to fight an impossible war to save people they barely knew. It would be a short story. The humans would arrive, fight bravely for a few minutes, and die. But maybe those minutes would be enough for some Altarians to reach the transport ships. "Send another message," she said. "Tell the humans we are grateful. Tell them we will remember their sacrifice." But even as she said the words, something felt wrong. The humans had sounded too sure of themselves, too calm, as if they knew something the rest of the galaxy did not. Hours passed. The swarm continued its work above. Zethra tried not to think about the people dying up there. Instead, she focused on the evacuation plans. Transport ships were already moving toward the outer planets where civilians waited. If the humans could hold the swarm for even an hour, thousands of lives might be saved. Ambassador, the technician's voice was sharp with excitement. I'm getting readings from the edge of the system. Something big is coming out of hyperspace. The humans? Yes, but the technician frowned at her instruments. These readings don't make sense. The energy signatures are enormous, much bigger than they should be. Commander Veltar moved to look at the displays. His eyes went wide. How many ships? I can't count them all. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. And they're moving in patterns I've never seen before. Zethra felt something cold in her stomach. Humans had thousands of ships? That was impossible. Every intelligence report said they were a small, weak species. Their technology was primitive. Their ships were crude. Are you sure those are human ships? She asked. The technician nodded. They're broadcasting human identification codes. But Ambassador, the power readings from those ships? No species in the galaxy has weapons that strong. Above them, something changed. The constant rumble of swarm weapons stopped. For the first time in 3 days, the city was quiet. What's happening up there? Veltar asked. The technician's voice was a whisper. The swarm ships are moving. They're taking defensive positions. Zethra stared at the ceiling. The Vorthak swarm was afraid. Impossible. The swarm had never shown fear. It had crushed every enemy it had ever faced, but something was coming from Earth. Something that made 40 million swarm ships stop their attack and prepare to defend themselves. Something that called itself a rescue mission but felt like the end of the world. The Vorthak overmind felt the disturbance in space and turned its attention toward the Sol system. Through 1,000,000 eyes on 1,000 ships, it watched the approaching human fleet. The numbers were small, perhaps 5,000 vessels at most. The overmind dismissed them with the cold logic that had conquered half the galaxy. Humans, the violent species from the dangerous world. The overmind had studied their files. They fought among themselves constantly. Their technology was crude compared to the great civilizations that had already fallen. Their largest ships were smaller than swarm fighters. The overmind calculated the threat level. 0. But something nagged at its vast consciousness. The human ships moved strangely. Not in the clean formations that civilized species used. Not in the defensive clusters that prey species formed when they were afraid. The humans spread out across space like they owned it. On the swarm command ship above Alteria Prime, Bio-Admiral Kethvox received new orders from the overmind. Continue the harvest. Ignore the approaching humans until they entered weapon range, then destroy them quickly. Save ammunition for real threats. Kethvox obeyed. It always obeyed. The swarm had no individuals, only the will of the overmind expressed through countless bodies. It turned its attention back to the planet below, where pockets of Altarian resistance still needed to be converted into biomass. In the underground shelter, Zethra watched her instruments with growing confusion. The human fleet had been approaching for 3 hours now, but their formation made no sense. Instead of staying together for protection, they had scattered across the entire star system. Some ships moved toward the inner planets. Others headed for the gas giants on the outer rim. A few seemed to be flying directly into the system's asteroid belt. What are they doing? Commander Veltar asked. That's not how you fight a battle. The young technician at the communication station looked up from her readings. I'm getting strange reports from our long-range sensors. Some of the human ships, they're disappearing from our scans. Destroyed already? No, sir, disappearing like they're not there anymore. But then they show up somewhere else. Zethra felt her scales prickle with unease. How is that possible? I don't know, Ambassador. Our physics don't work that way. Above them, the swarm continued its methodical destruction of the city, but something had changed in their attack pattern. The constant barrage had slowed. Instead of focusing all their fire on civilian targets, many swarm ships were now facing outward toward space. They're getting nervous, Veltar said with surprise. I've never seen the swarm act defensive before. The technician's instruments began beeping frantically. Ambassador! Energy spike from the human fleet. All ships are powering up weapons. How big a spike? The technician stared at her readouts. Bigger than our planetary defense grid. Each ship is showing energy output equal to a small star. That was impossible. Zethra had seen the intelligence reports on human technology. They used simple fusion reactors and chemical rockets. Their weapons were crude projectiles and basic energy beams. They couldn't possibly generate power on that scale. "Check your instruments," she ordered. "I've checked them 3 times, Ambassador. The readings are correct. Those human ships are putting out more energy than any vessel in recorded history." The swarm seemed to sense it too. Through the crystal windows, Zethra could see the alien ships changing their formations. Instead of the loose patterns they used for harvesting operations, they were forming tight defensive spheres. Millions of fighters poured out of the larger vessels like angry insects. The Vorthak overmind paused in its calculations. The energy readings from the human fleet were unusual. Still not enough to threaten the swarm, of course, but unusual. Perhaps these creatures had learned some new trick in their short time among the stars. No matter. Numbers were numbers. 40 million swarm ships against 5,000 human vessels. The outcome was certain, but the overmind gave new orders anyway. Deploy full defensive formations. Prepare conversion protocols. If the humans had new technology, it would be absorbed and improved upon after their destruction. On Alteria Prime, the bombardment stopped completely. "They've ceased firing," Veltar reported. "All swarm ships are moving to combat positions." Zethra watched the displays in amazement. For 3 days, the swarm had ignored everything except the harvest. Now they were acting like they faced a real threat. What did they see in the human fleet that she was missing? "How long until the humans arrive?" she asked. 17 minutes until the first ships enter the outer system." "But Ambassador," the technician's voice was strange. "I'm reading some human vessels already in the system. They weren't there a minute ago. That's impossible." "Yes, ma'am, but they're there." The displays showed dozens of human ships appearing throughout the Kepler 442 system. Not arriving from hyperspace, just appearing. As if they had been hiding in places that didn't exist. Commander Veltar studied the tactical display with the eye of a professional soldier. "I don't understand their strategy. They're not concentrating their forces for an attack. They're not forming defensive lines. They're just everywhere." Zethra nodded slowly. Human military doctrine was supposed to be simple. Overwhelming firepower applied to a single point. Brutal but effective against other humans. Not sophisticated enough for space warfare against an advanced enemy. But this didn't look like human doctrine. This looked like something entirely different. "Ambassador," the technician said quietly. "I'm picking up transmissions from the human fleet. They're not speaking to us. Who are they speaking to? Each other. All of them, constantly. It's like they're all parts of the same mind, the same mind." Zethra felt ice in her veins. The only species that fought with true unity was the Vorthak swarm itself. Individual ships acting as a single organism, sharing thoughts and tactics instantly across impossible distances, but humans were supposed to be individuals, chaotic, disorganized. That's what made them both violent and weak, unless they had learned something new. The first human ship entered. Visual range of the planet. On the main display, Zethra could see it clearly for the first time. It looked wrong. The hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Weapons appeared and disappeared along its surface. The ship's size kept changing as she watched it. "What kind of vessel is that?" Veltar whispered. Before anyone could answer, the human ship did something impossible. It split into 3 identical copies of itself. Then each copy split again. Within seconds, one ship had become 12. The Vorthak overmind felt something it had not experienced in 1,000 years of conquest. Uncertainty. The human vessels defied every law of physics the swarm understood. They appeared and disappeared at will. They changed size and shape without explanation. They moved in patterns that suggested coordination far beyond what individual minds should achieve. Most disturbing of all, they were taking positions that made no tactical sense unless they planned to attack from dimensions the swarm couldn't access. For the first time since the war began, the overmind considered the possibility that it had made an error in judgment. The humans had not come to rescue a few thousand Altarian refugees. They had come for the swarm itself. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the UES Dauntless and watched her fleet take position around Kepler 442. Through her neural link, she could feel the presence of every human ship in the system. Thousands of minds working as one, sharing tactical data faster than light could travel between stars. "All ships report ready for Phase 1, her tactical officer announced. Chen nodded. For 37 years, humanity had waited for this moment. Since the day they first learned about the Vorthak swarm, they had been preparing, not just building weapons but becoming something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. Begin revelation protocol, she ordered. Across the system, human ships stopped pretending to be what everyone thought they were. The crude hulls melted away like discarded masks, revealing vessels that defied every law of physics the galaxy understood, ships that existed in multiple dimensions at once, weapons that could reach across space and time to touch their targets. The humans had lied to everyone for decades. Not about wanting peace, that was true, but about their capabilities. While the galaxy saw them as primitive warmongers from a dangerous world, humanity had been building the most advanced military force in known space. Admiral, her communications officer said, "We're getting confused signals from the swarm fleet. They're trying to analyze our ship configurations." Chen smiled coldly. Let them try. The human deception had been perfect. Every diplomat who visited Earth saw exactly what they expected to see. Crude fusion engines that barely worked, simple weapons that fired solid projectiles, computer systems that processed data slower than most species' toys. None of it had been real. The fusion reactors were actually quantum singularities contained in pocket dimensions. The projectile weapons were launchers for self-replicating matter converters. The slow computers were quantum processing networks that operated outside normal space-time. Humanity had studied every species that fell to the swarm. They learned how the aliens thought, how they fought, how they died. Most importantly, they learned the swarm's weaknesses. Every evolutionary flaw, every tactical blind spot, every limitation in their seemingly perfect hive mind. Swarm fleet is moving to intercept, the tactical officer reported. 43 million vessels in attack formation. Let them come, Chen said. All ships prepare for combat demonstration. Target selection, Swarm Forward Fleet Alpha. Through her neural link, Chen felt her fleet respond. Not as separate ships following orders, but as parts of her own extended body. The humans had done what no other species thought possible. They had kept their individual personalities while linking their minds in battle. The result was a fighting force that combined the best of both worlds. The creativity and adaptability of individual thought with the perfect coordination of a hive mind. The first swarm ships entered weapon range and opened fire. Brilliant energy beams that could melt mountains struck the human fleet. The beams passed through the ships harmlessly. Phase variance holding steady, the tactical officer announced. Enemy weapons are 3 dimensions off target. The swarm ships fired again, adjusting their aim. This time the beams hit empty space where human vessels had been microseconds before. The ships had simply stepped sideways into parallel dimensions, fought from there, then returned to normal space behind the enemy. Admiral Chen felt the moment when the Vorthak overmind realized what it was facing. Through captured swarm communication networks, she sensed its growing panic. The hive mind that had conquered half the galaxy was experiencing fear for the first time in millennia. Begin counterattack, she ordered. The human response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Instead of returning fire with energy weapons or missiles, the ships released something far more terrible. They attacked the fundamental forces that held matter together. Swarm vessels simply ceased to exist, not destroyed by explosions or vaporized by heat. They were unmade at the quantum level. Their atoms scattered across multiple dimensions simultaneously. One moment they were there, the next moment they had never existed at all. The Vorthak overmind tried to adapt, as it always did. It ordered the swarm ships to spread out, to vary their tactics, to evolve new defenses. But the humans adapted faster. Every change the swarm made was anticipated and countered within seconds. Chen watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The first swarm fleet was already gone, not retreating, simply erased. The second fleet was trying to maintain formation. But human ships were appearing inside their defensive perimeter, phasing through armor that existed in normal space to attack components that existed in other dimensions. Swarm fleet attempting biomass conversion, her science officer reported. They're trying to turn our destroyed ships into more fighters. Chen laughed. They can try. The human ships weren't just protected by advanced technology. They were protected by existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When a ship was destroyed in one dimension, it simply continued fighting from the others. The swarm couldn't convert matter that wasn't entirely present in normal space. But the real surprise came when the swarm tried its most desperate tactic. Bio-Admiral Kethvox ordered the conversion of an entire moon into a massive weapon. The rocky satellite dissolved into billions of guided missiles, each seeking a human target. The human fleet response was immediate and terrifying. Instead of defending against the attack, they reached out and touched the star that powered the Kepler 442 system. Solar matter flowed through quantum tunnels directly into human weapon systems. The missile swarm was not destroyed. It was converted into pure energy and fed back into the star, making it burn brighter and hotter. The excess energy was then channeled into weapons that fired coherent stellar matter across multiple dimensions. Swarm ships caught in the attack didn't just die. They were transformed into new matter at the subatomic level. Their atoms became part of the space around them, spreading their destruction to every ship nearby. The Vorthak Overmind finally understood what humanity was. Not a primitive species that had stumbled into space technology. Not violent savages who solved problems with crude weapons. They were the species that evolution created when it wanted to build the perfect survivors. 4 billion years of constant danger had taught them to be adaptable, ruthless, and utterly dedicated to protecting their own. But their own now included everyone who had asked for their help. "Admiral," the communications officer said, "the Altarians are sending messages. They're asking what we are." Chen looked out at the burning remains of the swarm fleet. In 17 minutes of combat, humanity had destroyed more enemy ships than the rest of the galaxy had managed in 300 years of war. "Tell them we're the rescue mission," she said quietly. "Tell them we're here to make sure this never happens to anyone again." Around Kepler 442, the greatest military force in galactic history continued its work. Not conquest, not dominance, just the simple, ruthless business of making sure the universe was safe for the innocent to live in. The swarm had made one fatal error. They had threatened the children of species that asked humanity for help. Now they would learn why evolution had made humans the apex predators of their world. News traveled across the galaxy faster than hyperspace. On 1,000 worlds in 100 different languages, the impossible reports were repeated over and over. The humans, those backward creatures from the violent world, had just destroyed the Vorthak swarms, advance fleets in less than 20 minutes. Zethra stood in the rebuilt command center on Altaria Prime and watched the tactical recordings for the 10th time. Her hands shook as she saw human ships do things that violated every law of physics she understood. Ships that existed in multiple places at once. Weapons that reached across space to unmake matter at the quantum level. Coordination that made the swarm's hive mind look clumsy and slow. "How many swarm ships did they destroy?" she asked Commander Veltar. The old soldier checked his datapad. His voice was filled with disbelief. 15 million vessels in the first engagement. Complete destruction. No survivors, no debris, nothing left to analyze. 15 million. The number that had taken the swarm decades to build. Gone in minutes. Zethra felt her legs go weak. What kind of species had her people called for help? Around the galaxy, the other civilizations were asking the same question. In the crystal cities of the Rigel Union, scientists worked frantically to understand the sensor readings from Kepler 442. The energy signatures made no sense. The tactical maneuvers were impossible. The weapons used forces that their physics said could not exist. On the metal worlds of the Silicon Confederacy's survivors, ancient computers calculated probability matrices and produced the same result every time. Error. The combat footage from Altaria Prime showed events with zero probability of occurrence. But the most disturbing reports came from the free traders who had ships near the battle zone. Their captains told stories that sounded like madness. Human vessels appearing from nowhere. Weapons that fired backwards through time. Ships that split themselves into dozens of copies, then merged back into one. Captain Mordak of the trading vessel Prophet's Edge transmitted his report to the Trader Council with hands that would not stop shaking. "I watched a human ship phase through a swarm dreadnought," he said. "Not around it. Through it. Like the dreadnought wasn't there. Then the human ship fired something from inside the swarm vessel. The dreadnought just stopped existing." The galactic intelligence networks went wild with speculation. For 37 years, humanity had seemed like just another species. Violent, yes. Dangerous to themselves, certainly. But not advanced, not sophisticated, not capable of military technology that made the great civilizations look like children playing with sticks. They had all been wrong. In the ethereal collective's hidden sanctuaries, the energy beings who had fled the swarm's advance tried to process what they had witnessed. Their kind perceived reality differently than solid species. They could see the dimensional layers that most creatures couldn't detect. What they saw in the human fleet terrified them. They exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously, reported observer Kethalon to the Collective Council. Their ships are not just vessels. They are living extensions of their crew's consciousness, powered by quantum singularities that should not be possible to contain. How long have they had this technology? Asked the council leader. Based on the sophistication of their dimensional manipulation, at least 50 years. Possibly longer. They have been planning this war since before they made contact with galactic civilization. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not stumbled into advanced technology. They had developed it in secret while presenting themselves as primitive newcomers. Every diplomatic meeting, every trade negotiation, every cultural exchange had been part of an elaborate deception. But why? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Admiral's younger sister and Earth's leading xenopsychologist, transmitted a message to the galactic community. Her words were broadcast on every frequency, translated into every known language. "You want to know why we hid our capabilities?" she said. "The answer is simple. We studied your history. We learned how advanced species treat less advanced ones, conquest, enslavement, or dismissal. We chose a fourth option, deception." She paused, letting her words sink in across the galaxy. "For 37 years, we watched how you fought wars. We saw the Centaurian Republic's noble charges against impossible odds. We witnessed the Silicon Confederacy's logical defensive strategies. We observed the ethereal collective's attempts to transcend physical conflict entirely. All of you fought like civilized beings." Another pause. On 1,000 worlds, listeners held their breath. "We are not civilized beings. We are survivors. Evolution spent 4 billion years teaching us that the universe wants to kill us, and we learned the lesson well. We don't fight wars to prove our honor or test our courage. We fight wars to end them. Permanently." The message continued, but its core point was clear. Humanity had not been hiding from galactic conflicts because they were weak. They had been waiting for a war worth fighting. On Alteria Prime, Zethra watched as human ships moved through her system like benevolent gods. They were not occupying her world or claiming territory. They were rebuilding. Massive construction vessels that existed partially outside normal space worked with impossible speed to repair the damage the swarm had caused. But it was not just physical reconstruction. Human teams were working with Alterian scientists to restore their genetic libraries, their cultural databases, their art collections. Everything the swarm had tried to destroy was being carefully rebuilt. "They're not conquerors," she told Veltar as they watched a human ship delicately reconstruct the great crystal library. "They're gardeners," the old commander nodded slowly. "I think that's what scares the other species most. If humans wanted to rule the galaxy, everyone could understand that. But they seem to genuinely want to protect it. That protection came with capabilities that defied understanding. Human ships could be everywhere at once, seeing threats from angles that didn't exist in normal space. Their weapons could reach across time to prevent attacks before they were launched. Their coordination was so perfect that 40,000 individual vessels fought as a single organism. Most unsettling of all, they shared their technology freely, not the advanced dimensional manipulation or quantum weapons. Those secrets remained human. But the basic principles of multidimensional thinking, quantum communication, and unified tactical consciousness were offered to any species that wanted to learn. The galaxy's response was mixed. Some species, like the Alterians, embraced the new knowledge gratefully. Others, like the proud Rigel Union, struggled with the idea that they needed help from newcomers. A few, like the isolationist Void Dwellers, simply refused to believe the reports. But belief was not required. The evidence was overwhelming. Humanity had revealed itself as the most advanced military force in known space. They had destroyed an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. And they had done it all to answer a desperate plea for help from people they barely knew. The question now was what came next, Admiral. Chen provided the answer in her final broadcast from Kepler 442. "We're going home," she announced. "Our job here is done. The swarm's advanced fleets are destroyed. The survivors are being hunted down by automated systems that will ensure they can never rebuild. Alteria Prime is safe." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. But let this be clear to anyone listening. Earth stands ready to answer any call for help. We will not conquer your worlds or rule your people. We will not demand payment or territory. We ask only that you remember what you saw here today. The universe is dangerous, but it is not empty of hope. As long as humanity exists, no innocent species will face extinction alone. The transmission ended. Around the galaxy, 1 billion beings tried to process what they had witnessed. The balance of power had shifted in ways no one could have predicted. The species everyone had dismissed as violent primitives were now the guardians of galactic civilization, and they were going home to wait for the next call for help. 72 hours after the human fleet's arrival at Kepler 442, the Vorthak swarm ceased to exist as a galactic threat, not defeated, not driven back to lick their wounds and rebuild, completely eliminated across 47 star systems. The hive mind that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries transmitted one final message across all frequencies before it died. What are you? Admiral Chen Wei heard that last desperate question as her fleet finished mopping up the scattered remnants of swarm forces throughout the region. From her command chair aboard the Dauntless, she composed humanity's answer and broadcast it on the same frequency the Overmind had used. We are what happens when evolution spends 4 billion years teaching a planet's apex predator that the universe is trying to kill it, she said simply. We are the species that learned to work together because the alternative was extinction. We are humanity, and we keep our promises. The promise had been simple, to rescue the Altarians and anyone else who needed help. But humanity's definition of rescue went far beyond what anyone expected. On Altaria Prime, Zethra walked through the rebuilt crystal gardens where Altarian children played among flowers that should have taken decades to grow. Human biotechnology had accelerated the natural processes, but in ways that enhanced rather than replaced the original Altarian designs. The gardens were more beautiful than they had ever been, yet still completely recognizable as Altarian art. Your people are artists too, she said to Ambassador Sarah Martinez, the human diplomat who had remained behind to coordinate reconstruction efforts. Sarah smiled as she watched a group of human and Altarian children chase each other through the crystal maze that formed the garden's centerpiece. We learned from you, your architectural philosophy, your biological harmony principles. We incorporated them into our reconstruction protocols. We didn't want to build human cities on your world. We wanted to build better Altarian cities. It was the same everywhere the human fleet had operated. Instead of imposing their own solutions, they had studied each species' culture, values, and aesthetic preferences. The rebuilt worlds were recognizably themselves, but improved in ways that felt natural and right to their inhabitants. But the physical reconstruction was only the beginning. The real change was happening in the minds of every species that had witnessed humanity's revelation. In the council chambers of the Rigel Union, President Kolomuth struggled with a reality that overturned everything he thought he knew about galactic politics. They could rule us all, he said to his advisors. Those weapons, that technology, we couldn't resist them if they decided to conquer the galaxy. But they won't, replied his intelligence chief. Every analysis we've run confirms it. They genuinely seem to want nothing more than to go home and be left alone. Until someone else calls for help. Yes. Until then. That was the new reality the galaxy had to accept. Humanity had revealed itself as a sleeping giant that would awaken only when innocents were threatened. They asked for no tribute, demanded no territory, imposed no governments. They simply made it clear that certain behaviors, genocide, unprovoked aggression, the destruction of entire civilizations, would no longer be tolerated. The effect was immediate and profound. Across known space, aggressive species reconsidered their expansion plans. Slavers released their captives rather than risk human attention. Pirates abandoned attacks on civilian vessels. Wars that had raged for decades suddenly found peaceful solutions as both sides realized they could not afford to attract Earth's notice, but not everyone was happy with the new order. The shadow worlds where the galaxy's criminals gathered, anger and fear mixed into dangerous combinations. Crime lords who had built empires on suffering found their operations crumbling as their victims now had protectors who could appear anywhere, anytime. They're destroying our way of life, complained Vextar the Slaver at a secret meeting of underworld leaders. For 1,000 years, the strong have ruled the weak. That's the natural order. These humans are trying to change everything. Then we change them back, growled Warchief Bruchtal of the Red Claw Pirates. They're just one species. If we unite against them. The meeting fell silent as the lights flickered and went out. When they came back on, a single human stood in the center of the room. She wore no uniform, carried no visible weapons, and looked completely ordinary except for her eyes. Those eyes held the cold certainty of someone who had made a decision. "Gentlemen," she said politely, "I'm Agent Lisa Park with Earth Intelligence. We've been monitoring your communications. The criminals reached for their weapons, but their hands wouldn't move. Some force held them frozen in their chairs. You're wondering how I got past your security." Park continued conversationally. "The answer is that your security exists in only 3 dimensions. I came through the 4th. You're also wondering if you can kill me before I call for backup. The answer is no. I'm not entirely here in the first place." She walked around the table, studying each face with scientific interest. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to disband your organizations. You're going to release every slave, return every stolen ship, and compensate your victims. You're going to find honest work, retire quietly, or leave the galaxy entirely. I don't care which." Vextar found his voice. "And if we refuse?" Park smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Then you'll discover why the Vorthak Overmind's last word was a question about what humans are. We're the species that ended a war by making our enemies stop existing. Permanently." She paused at the door, turning back with an almost casual air. "Oh, and gentlemen, don't think about running. We know where all of you live, work, and hide. In all dimensions. Make the right choice." She stepped sideways and vanished, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and the certain knowledge that humanity was watching everything. Within days, the galaxy's criminal underworld began its greatest transformation in recorded history, not because of laws or military pressure, but because everyone now knew there were consequences for harming innocents. Meanwhile, the legitimate government struggled to understand their new position in galactic affairs. Traditional diplomacy assumed that all participants had roughly equal capabilities. What did you do when one species possessed technology that made everyone else's militaries obsolete? The answer came from an unexpected source, the humans themselves. "We don't want to rule you," Admiral Chen explained to the emergency session of the Galactic Council via quantum communication link. "We don't want your resources, your territory, or your obedience. We want exactly what we've always wanted, to be left alone to explore, trade, and make friends." "But you could take anything you wanted," pointed out Council Leader Mordak. "Yes, we could. That's precisely why we won't. Power without restraint is what created the Vorthak swarm in the first place. We've seen what happens when a species decides that might makes right." Chen's image flickered as the quantum link adjusted across the vast distance between Earth and the Council chambers. "We're proposing something different. A mutual defense compact. Any species that wants our protection in exchange for a simple promise. No aggressive wars, no slavery, no genocide. Help your neighbors instead of conquering them. Trade instead of raid. Build instead of destroy. And if we refuse?" asked the representative from the Void Dwellers. "Then you refuse. We won't force anyone to accept our help, but we also won't help anyone who chooses to harm others." It was diplomacy unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Not threats or bribes or complex treaties. Just a simple offer. Behave decently and humanity would ensure that you were safe to do so. Most species accepted immediately. A few held out, suspicious of humanity's motives. But as months passed and the humans kept their word, intervening only when innocents were threatened, asking nothing in return, even the skeptics began to change their minds. The transformation wasn't just political. It was cultural. For the first time in galactic history, species began to see cooperation as more profitable than competition. Trade networks expanded as pirates disappeared. Scientific collaboration increased as the fear of having discoveries stolen by aggressive neighbors faded away. Art, literature, and music flourished as civilizations no longer had to devote most of their resources to military defense. And at the center of it all, humanity quietly went about their business. They explored new systems, established trading posts, and made friends with anyone who wanted to be friends. To most observers, they seemed exactly like the peaceful, curious species they had always claimed to be. But everyone knew the truth now. Behind the friendly facade was the most formidable military force in the known universe. A sleeping giant that asked for nothing except that the galaxy's children be allowed to grow up safe. On Alteria Prime, Zethra stood in her rebuilt office and composed her final report as ambassador to the Galactic Council. Her words would be studied for generations by diplomats and historians trying to understand the day everything changed. They called Earth for rescue, she wrote, expecting a few ships to evacuate our survivors. What arrived was the fleet of Obliteration. Not to obliterate us, but to obliterate the very concept that innocent people should live in fear. Humanity didn't come to save the Altarians. They came to save the idea that there should be places in the universe where children can play, without looking at the sky in terror. She paused, looking out her window at those same children now playing safely in the crystal gardens. The galaxy is different now. Not because we have new rulers, but because we have new guardians. And for the first time in recorded history, those guardians want nothing from us except the chance to help. The report concluded with a simple observation that would become the unofficial motto of the new galactic age. When the universe grows dark and dangerous, call Earth. They'll bring the light. Far away in the Sol system, Admiral Chen read Zethra's report and smiled. Around her, the fleet of Obliteration was already dispersing to return to their normal duties. Exploring, trading, making friends, waiting quietly for the next call for help. Because that's what humanity did. It kept its promises.